The OG Mystical says this stream will end abruptly. Please feel free to fast forward.
You're listening to The Ancient Tradition, a Wonk Media production. Music provided by Joseph McDade. Here's your host, Dr. Jack Logan.
Welcome to the program. I'm your host, Jack Logan. So happy to have you back, and welcome to all of our new listeners. So glad to have you with us as well. We have a great program today. I'm anxious to jump right in and get started. I want to start with a brief recap from last episode. We started with the creation. Why? Because that's where the ancients started, by addressing the greatest mystery in the world, how life came to be. The ancients assigned extraordinary importance to the creation, which in scholar speak is known as the cosmogony, the story of the origin of the universe. And in this episode, we'll delve a little more into why they started with the creation and why they felt it was so important to begin there. We also established that the ancients didn't tell radically different creation stories. From van der Sloot's research, we learned that the ancients told a strikingly similar story of how the universe, the earth, and life came to be. And they told that same story all over the globe, from hemisphere to hemisphere and continent to continent, as improbable as that would seem. Which van der Sloot contends that the uniformity of the creation story is, quote, a strong argument in favor of a homogeneous origin. And we refer to that origin here as the ancient tradition. We also established that the ancients began their creation story with a description of the pre-creative state of the universe as water, or a primordial sea. And this, to the modern mind, might seem odd or kind of bizarre to describe the pre-creative state of the universe as water or milk. But this perception, like I mentioned in the bonus section, is actually due to a modern-day lack of symbolism literacy than it is to a lack of sophistication among the ancients. In fact, you'll find throughout these episodes that quite the opposite is true. The ancients used symbols in such a sophisticated way, symbols that involved entire systems of correspondences, to such a degree that even today scholars with multiple academic degrees from prominent universities still struggle to unravel their complex relationships and attribute any sort of true religious meaning to them. And this is especially apparent in Egyptology. It's important to point out here that the ancients didn't believe that their pre-creative state was made of actual milk or actual water. These descriptions are symbolic. Foremost scholar of comparative religion, who you should know by now, Mircea Eliade, refers to this as, quote, aquatic symbolism or aquatic cosmology. He notes, quote, one point is essential here. The structure of aquatic cosmogonies can be completely revealed only through aquatic symbolism, which is the only system capable of integrating all of the particular revelations of innumerable hierophanies. Now, if you're not familiar with what a hierophany is, it's a manifestation of the sacred. It's a spiritual experience. This law, moreover, holds for every symbolism. It is the symbolism as a whole that valorizes the various significations of hierophanies. The waters reveal their deeper meaning only to the extent to which the structure of aquatic symbolism is known. In other words, modern day men and women like you and myself must increase our symbolism literacy, or we're just going to forever be in the dark. The ancients used symbols of everyday temporal objects like water and milk to express the inexpressible, to convey inexpressible, sacred, transcendent, spiritual realities or spiritual truths. Symbols are a way for human beings to express things that they have a difficult time expressing, or such as the spiritual are impossible to perfectly express. For example, writers do this all the time when they use similes. When they say something like, Joe is like a bull. We all know that Joe is not literally a bull, but the writer uses a bull as a way to express that Joe has characteristics that are similar to that of a bull. And the author is hoping that the reader knows enough about bulls to recognize characteristics of bullish behavior, power and aggression and fertility in the person that he's comparing to a bull. Now, the difference with sacred symbols is that they can never perfectly convey sacred reality, because that reality is, by nature, ineffable or inexpressible. A good modern-day example of this might be to try and express in words the deep love that you have for another person, that almost spiritual type of love that you might have for, say, your mother. Whenever I've tried to do this, I end up looking down at the cards I've written, and thinking how the words completely lack in conveying what I deeply feel. The ancients would tell you, don't worry about this, because it's not even possible to convey with temporal words the reality of spiritual love. It's too profound, too multidimensional, too awesome to put into our limited vocabulary. There isn't vocabulary for it. So then how do you express it? With a massive bouquet of roses, poetry by poets who seem to come a whole lot closer to expressing the inexpressible than the rest of us, with a hug, a card. We use all of these things we can think of to convey the spiritual reality of the deep love we are feeling. But we always know inside that we haven't expressed it exactly how we are experiencing it. And everything of a spiritual reality is this way. It's not possible to fully express spiritual reality to another person. You just can't do it. The only way another person can understand it is by experiencing it for themselves. And this comes in only one way, through spiritual revelation. Spiritual reality is revealed. It doesn't come any other way. For example, the closest we can come to conveying spiritual reality, such as spiritual love, is through symbolic approximations, which is why we often use roses or beautiful flowers. They convey how spiritual love is beautiful and inspiring, alive, how spiritual love blossoms and grows. And if we sit there and contemplate their beauty long enough, they can give us glimpses of the spiritual love. But however much those flowers approximate spiritual love, they're still only an approximation. They are not spiritual love itself. Because the only way to know what spiritual love is to experience it for oneself. Those flowers are really helpful, however, because they point us in the right direction. They make the inexpressible a bit more accessible. I mentioned this quote in the bonus section. I want to give it to you again. It comes from French scholar René Grignon, and he says it like this, quote, "One of the general functions of symbolism is effectively to suggest the inexpressible, to give a presentiment of it, or better said, to render it accessible, from what can be grasped immediately to what can be grasped only with much greater difficulty." I have a whole lot I want to add to these points on symbolism, but I'll sprinkle them throughout the episodes. What's important here is that religious symbols are tools to help direct our minds, to help us ponder the spiritual, to hint at the spiritual realities that are accessible to us if we're only willing to pay the price. Back to the primordial waters. Now, of course, there will always be those who claim that the ancients conceived of a pre-creative state composed of literal milk and water. And that assertion really lays bare the asserters' symbolism illiteracy, or basically their lack of understanding, and not the ancients' lack of understanding. Guignon said it best, and he says it with a bit of a sting to it. He says, quote, "Philosophers will never succeed in penetrating the deeper meaning of even the least important symbol, because symbolism goes entirely beyond their manner of thinking, and thus inevitably eludes their grasp." Gotta love Guignon. It's popular in scholarship today to portray the ancients as primitive, humans of intellectual inferiority. But I think you'll see as your symbolism literacy increases throughout these episodes that the ancients were anything but intellectual inferiors. In fact, I think you'll find that you are impressed, even inspired, by the sophisticated layers upon layers of meaning and correspondences that are concealed in the symbols the ancients used to express spiritual reality. So it's one thing to describe the ancients' cosmology, but it's another thing entirely to understand that what the ancients meant by using the images and symbols that they did to express the creation of the universe. Religion is and always has been about meaning, spiritual meaning, not the actual temporal symbols used. So we have to search for the shared meaning behind the symbols of water and milk, or the ancients' conception of the pre-creative state ends up looking like nothing more than a fantastical, improbable, childish description of creation. If we want to unravel the central mystery of the world, how the universe, the earth, and life came to be, we have to start by deciphering the symbols the ancients used to describe it. And when we do, it will unlock the amazing spiritual principles and realities hidden behind those symbols. So let's start with water, or aquatic cosmology. David Leeming, a graduate of Princeton University and a well-known expert in mythology, when describing the primordial waters, wrote in the Encyclopedia of Psychology and Religion the following, quote, "All cultures naturally recognize water as a necessary source of life and survival, making it a useful symbol of creative fertility, spiritual and psychological fertility, as well as physical fertility." An Indian text in the Vedic tradition says something quite similar. It says, quote, "Water, thou art the source of all things and of all existence." Dr. Leeming continues, quote, "At the same time, large masses of water are uncontrollable and therefore aptly representative of chaos, the chaos that precedes creation. These two symbolic functions, source of life and chaos, lead us to the idea of potential as yet unformed reality. The waters also speak to the larger metaphor of creation as birth. We are all born of the maternal waters. And so in creation mythology, worlds are typically born of the waters." So the ancients used water to express three very important, and there's probably a whole lot more than these three because that's how symbolism works, aspects of the pre-creative state. So first, they use water to express that the pre-creative state had the potential for life. In the temporal world, the relationship between water and life is pretty clear. It's abundant. Water is essential to the growth of plants, fields of grain, trees, and it's also essential for the life of human beings. Our bodies require a constant replenishing of water to stay alive. All of our vital organs require water to survive. As human beings, you can't survive longer than 3 days without water. Water sustains every creation. The ancients selected water to describe the pre-creative state precisely because in the temporal world, it is essential to the fertility of the earth and the sustainment of life. It is the source of life, the sustaining source of existence. We see water used symbolically in the Christian tradition in the New Testament in John chapter 4, verse 14, when Christ associates the life-giving properties of water to the life-giving properties of his doctrine. the life-giving properties of following his teachings. And in John chapter 4, verse 14, it reads, quote, "But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water, springing up into everlasting life." In this verse, Christ is using water as a symbol to teach the woman at the well a really important spiritual principle. He's teaching her that, like water, which is the source of physical life, fertility, and growth, that he and his doctrine is the source of spiritual life, the life of the soul. He's teaching her that if she will drink from his doctrine, which contains the source of everlasting life, that it will nourish her spirit. It will sprout like a seed and grow within her, enlarging her soul, enlightening her understanding, and expanding her mind until symbolically the tree of life, the tree of everlasting life, has taken root within her and reached full bloom within her soul. Christ is teaching that his living water is the source of that spiritual growth. I hope you can see here how Christ is using a temporal symbol, water, to express much, much greater spiritual realities. Second, the ancients used water to express the pre-creative state of the universe was just that, pre-created. It was without creation. It was characterized as a state of disorder or chaos. The ancients used descriptions like roiling waters and churning milk to symbolize a formless, disordered, confused, chaotic, unorganized, uncontrollable, diffuse, undifferentiated, amorphous state. Basically, all of the words that are the antithesis of creation and order. You know, one way you might think of this is like Legos. And I don't know if you have any kids or anything like that where you just have these buckets of Legos and the Legos are just spread out all over the floor. And there's just Legos everywhere. It's like a sea or an ocean of Legos. There is no creation to them. There is no form to them. They have the potential for incredible innovations and creations the kids can make out of them. But in the state that they are amorphous. They're without creation. They're undifferentiated. Now, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's kind of a good one for what they're trying to do by using water to express the pre-creative state. Vandersloot refers to it as, quote, "the primordial condition of unorganized singularity." You know, what's really interesting about the ancient description of the pre-creative state is that it is not depicted as empty. The ancients don't characterize it as bare or unfilled or containing nothing. In fact, it's just the opposite. They characterize it as a pre-creative substance that's brimming with the potential for life. They use words like sea to convey that this substance is vast and fills the pre-creative state for as far as the eye can see. Vandersloot notes, after cataloging thousands of ancient cosmologies, the following. He says, quote, "The concept of creation ex nihilo, or a formation of all existing things out of nothing, is largely a figment of modern speculations, foreign to archaic thought. In mythical and early cosmological traditions, the world is almost always stated to have been formed from some sort of pre-existent material, be it confused and disorganized, a state of chaos that possessed substance and was not preceded by an era of, quote, nothing. Only a few exceptions to this pattern exist." Vandersloot concludes that this characterization of a substance-filled pre-creative state brimming with creative potential is, quote, "the earliest remembered putative," now putative means generally considered or understood, "state of the universe." He hasn't found an earlier, different characterization of the pre-creative state in his inventory of traditional cosmology. And I think that's pretty interesting. Knowing a bit about the history of the notion of creation as creation ex nihilo is kind of helpful. The notion of creation ex nihilo, a creation out of nothing, actually doesn't show up in the written form until the 2nd century AD, thousands and thousands of years after the ancients declared the pre-creative state was made up of some type of unorganized substance or matter. This notion of creation ex nihilo was first proposed in writing by Theophilus of Antioch. He was the patriarch of Antioch between 169 and 182 AD. You can find his write-up on ex nihilo creation in his work to Autosilius. Theophilus's ideas were later then adopted by the Church Fathers as a tenet of Christian theology. It's telling that Theophilus comes to creation ex nihilo on his own, via reason or philosophical invention. He never makes a single claim that creation ex nihilo was divinely revealed to him. And this is in stark contrast to the ancients who across the globe reiterate that the knowledge of the cosmogony, the creation born out of pre-existent matter, was revealed to human beings in the beginning. It turns out that the ancients were truly onto something. What's really interesting is that both the ancient creation story and modern science have converged, and they give us reason to genuinely question the late adoption of the ex nihilo model of creation. In Latin, the ancients' depiction of the pre-creative state of the universe is a universe ex nihilo nihil fit, which means nothing comes from nothing. Which means that the creation of the universe wasn't formed out of nothing. It was formed out of some type of eternal, unorganized, undifferentiated matter. Real matter. And interestingly, between 1824 and 1912, 3 scientists, Sadi Carnot, Rudolf Clausius, and William Thomson, and there's a 4th one, Walther Nernst, established the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, of which there are 3. The first law of thermodynamics states, quote, "The total energy of an isolated system is constant. Energy can be transformed from one form to another, but can be neither created nor destroyed." In other words, the total amount of energy in the universe never changes. No matter what, energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only change form. It might be a little difficult to wrap our brains around this idea, but it's been confirmed again and again by science. Energy, which is made up of matter, is eternal. It can't be destroyed. Albert Einstein demonstrated this tight relationship between energy and matter in his famous equation E equals mc squared, or energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, when he showed that energy was a property of matter. And Einstein argued that the amount of energy and matter in the universe was fixed. And what's more, recent scientific modeling suggests that matter and energy might be one and the same thing. Larry Silverberg, a professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering out of North Carolina State University, and his colleague, Jeffrey Eischen, Silverberg wrote in December 2020, quote, "My colleague and I have described an updated way to think about matter. We propose that matter is not made of particle or waves, as was long thought, but more fundamentally that matter is made of fragments of energy." And so far, their models have been stunningly accurate. So according to the first law of thermodynamics, energy can't be created or destroyed. It's eternal. And if we couple this with Silverberg and Eischen's work demonstrating that matter is made up of fragments of energy, then we can say the same thing about matter as you can say about energy. It can't be created or destroyed. It's eternal. Just like the ancients described the primordial ocean, a sea of materia prima, raw material or first matter, a mass of unordered matter, best visualized as water or milk for the life it has the potential to bring forth. One last scientific insight. Scientists have never been able to create anything ex nihilo, not a thing. They've never been able to create something out of nothing. They can't do it. They have, however, been able to create matter out of light, which is extremely interesting. Basically, they use the RHIC, or Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider, and they slammed photons of light together, and pairs of electrons and positrons of matter were created.
Yes.
The
that is-
Brookhaven National Laboratory, which conducted the research, notes this, quote, "This conversion of energetic light into matter is a direct consequence of Einstein's famous E equals mc squared equation, which states that energy and matter are interchangeable. Nuclear reactions in the sun and at the nuclear power plants regularly convert matter into energy. Now scientists have converted light energy directly into matter in a single step." So yes, it does look like it is possible to make matter. But it's extremely important to point out that the scientists didn't create matter. They manufactured matter, and there's a huge difference. They manufactured matter out of something else, something that existed previous to it, light photons. Just like the ancients maintained, creation today is only possible ex nihilo nihil fit. You can't make something out of nothing. You can only create something out of something, and that something is eternal. The ancients were really onto something that we are barely beginning to understand about creation and cosmology in the 21st century. Vandersloot reiterates, quote, "Traditions of nothing as the earliest state of the universe are far outnumbered by creation accounts that postulate the original existence of matter in some typically disorganized, undifferentiated, or undesirable form."
That's no good.
Presentation of scientific evidence here demands a quick intermission. Religious individuals don't need to reject science. I, for one, don't. I love so many of the things I've learned through scientific investigation. I might reject the assumptions that underlie the scientific method, but I do not reject that science can and has illuminated my understanding of the natural world. I don't see a need to pit one against the other. However, I would argue that science is in its infancy and limited by available evidence, whereas God, the supreme being, is not. I'd argue that one day, if given enough time, the two would converge. For now, I believe God, the supreme being, keeps some things hidden from science so that faith can and has to be developed. Living in a temporal existence, we may demand a cause for the existence of this said matter. So it may be difficult for us to wrap our heads around the possibility that matter has always existed, that it's fixed and can't be created or destroyed, that it's eternal. But we don't get very far if we go down this rabbit hole. Let's give it a whirl. If God created matter, then who or what created God? And if God was created by a God, then who or what created that God? You get the picture. It's an infinite regress. The answer to who created God will always take one back to an uncaused cause. In this temporal world, we demand to know its causative agent. But as mind-bending as it might be, there is the possibility that it has always existed. That matter and God or the supreme being have always existed. That nothing, quote, caused them to be. Philosopher William Free argued that there are really only two options. Either existence always existed, or it spontaneously emerged. In either case, there is not a cause, as unsettling as that is to we terrestrial types. We are socialized in our temporal experience that A must precede B in time, and therefore everything must have a cause. But this expectation of and search for a cause is not necessarily a necessity, especially for a realm outside of the terrestrial that may well be atemporal or outside of time. In such a case, a causative agent for eternal matter or a supreme being would not be a necessity. All right, back to how the ancients used water to express three important characteristics of the pre-creative state. And unravel the mysteries behind the primordial water here. The first sized the pre-creative state as a state full of potential for life. The second emphasized the pre-creative state as a state of abundant, chaotic, disorganized matter. Third, water as aquatic cosmology speaks to the much more profound motif of birth. This is really important in terms of the spiritual implications of aquatic symbolism. When a woman's water breaks, the physical birth of a child takes place. Water is the precursor to birth, be it the birth of the cosmos, the birth of the earth, the birth of a child, and as we'll see throughout these episodes, the birth of the spiritual being. We'll see that aquatic cosmology will serve as one of the most profound expressions, if not